The fact that the Prophet Muhammad married 6-year-old Aisha, then after consummated that marriage when she was only 9, should trouble most Muslims' moral compass. Would you marry your 6-year-old daughter to a 50-year-old man? Is it a good thing that this action troubles you, or should you do as others and find anything possible to justify this? He was, after all, the seal of the prophets of Allah, the perfect man to walk amongst us, the one we should all look up to as our ideal. So should one doubt all that has been given as truth, or should one strive to seek his own truth and validate it? If Muhammad himself did not question things in his time, then Islam would not be here today, so there should be no issue in also seeking the right path. So firstly, let us see how Islam and other Muslims justify this issue. Some just outright negate it. It is not true, they say, or that Aisha was not really that young. Others accept it, but say this is over 1400 years ago. This comes from a period of time where such conditions were the only available options. This was the norm of the society. Others state, girls in those days developed before others claim. Either way, such reasoning may or may not answer your doubts, or is it all what it appears to be? That is an attempt to justify the unjustifiable? What I say is, in case of doubt, you should look for other matters. How did the Prophet, for example, behave in the case of his marriage to Zainab bint Jahsh? As you know, Zainab was the wife of Muhammad's adopted son Zaid, and also Muhammad's first cousin. Apparently Allah permits Muhammad to be attracted to his own adopted son's wife, so he sees to it that Zaid divorces his wife so he could have her. This time it is not a hadith, but the Quran itself that tells us. Only this time it is not us who are embarrassed by his actions by modern standards, but his own followers at that same time. Even 1400 years ago, people felt uncomfortable by a person marrying his own adopted son's just divorced wife, let alone their prophet. But Allah, all-knowing and ever-understanding, intervenes and sends this verse to placate them. The Prophet is doing nothing wrong, we are told, and this is interpreted as Allah's message that adopted persons are not to be treated as your children. The justification here is that Muhammad had to sacrifice himself and take his adopted son's young wife to prove a point. Let's take another incident. How about the time that the companions of the Prophet had another dilemma? Following the Battle of Hunain, they wished to rape the women captured as booty, as they had been too long away from their wives. But even they did not feel this is right, as their polytheist husbands were still alive. We read from Bukhari, so once again we have something that not only may be embarrassing by today's standards, but desert warriors of 1400 years ago also felt bad about it. However, once again, Allah intervenes and sends down an important message to his prophet that married women are haram, except, of course, those whom your right hand possesses. Here we find our prophet legitimizing rape in front of these women's own husbands. Then we have another story, that of Muhammad's wife Hafsa, finding him having sex with his slave girl Maria the Copt, who then goes on to involve Aisha in her protest with the prophet. Maria was not booty of war, but a gift to him, and therefore not permissible to him by his own words. Perhaps this story is of dubious origin, and other contradictory hadiths refer to an issue of Hafsa and Aisha being jealous about Muhammad having honey at the house of Zainab. Whatever the story, once again Allah comes to the rescue of his beloved prophet, and we read in Surah 66:1-4. So once again, the prophet's sex life is so important to Allah that such marital matters had to find themselves in his inspired message. It seemed important for Allah to make it clear in the very Quran that whatever the issue was, whether it was sleeping with his concubine Mary the Copt, with whom later he had a son, or whether it was having honey with Zainab, why should the Prophet hold back and refrain from what Allah has made lawful to him just to please 2 of his wives? On a more general note, we come to another perhaps embarrassing detail, that of all Muhammad's women. Amongst these we find Khadija, with whom he remained monogamous until her death. Sauda, when older, begged him not to divorce her, so she offered him to enjoy Aisha on her night also. Aisha, the absolute youngest and his favorite. Hafsa, a war widow. Zainab, another war widow, died shortly after her marrying him. Hind, another widow reluctant to marry him as he already had several wives. Zainab, Muhammad's cousin and ex-wife of his adopted son. Juwayriyah, a war captive who asked to be set free, but Muhammad married her instead. Safiya, Muhammad married her after she was taken captive at the Battle of Khaybar. Ramia, married to forge a peace treaty with the Quraysh tribe of Mecca. Maymuna proposed marriage to Muhammad in Mecca. And of course, 11 wives did not seem to be enough, as he had other concubines and slaves. Amongst these other than Mary the Copt further above, we also find Rehana. She was a Jewish woman enslaved after her husband, father and brothers were massacred from the Banu Qurayza at the very hands of the Prophet and his followers. Just imagine how this woman must have felt as she was made to submit herself sexually to the very man who destroyed her family. Of course, we once more have a justification of the Prophet personally sacrificing himself to cater for her widowhood. We of course hear many more justifications why Muhammad in his later years seemed to need so many women. The chief of these is acts of mercy towards widows, even if, as in the case of Rehana above, she was in fact widowed as a result of his conquest and of his destroying her family. So we are given to understand that it was not a question of sex or physical need, but one of duty. But in any case, we read about these duties from the Hadith. As you know, this in itself was against the Prophet's own instruction of a limit of 4 wives. However, once more Allah comes in conveniently with another inspired verse to justify this. So I would say that the issue of Aisha's age is not the only embarrassing thing about Muhammad. His whole sex life and his many women all seem to point to a somewhat unexpected behavior for one who is supposedly our life role model. And that, of course, is just one aspect of his life, without considering his conquests and the spread of Islam by the sword. Once again, we find not one, but many who will surely justify all this by one way or another. It was the custom at the time. He needed some marriage to consolidate some tribal treaty to spread the message. I ask you, however, to reflect on the lesser prophet Isa, Jesus, who more than 500 years earlier did not seem to need any treaties or any swords for that matter. What was justifiable at 1400 years ago did not seem to be an issue around 2000 years ago in a nearby area and similar culture. He did not need any marriages and did not feel obliged to marry any widow, neither to protect her honor nor to ensure her life. He did not marry anyone, let alone a child. Rather, when children were brought to him, he said, when he saved the harlot from those who would stone her, he did not feel the need to marry her to save her reputation, nor to bed her. Rather, he told her to go, to repent, and to not sin anymore. When asked by the Pharisees about divorce, Jesus did not speak of telling talaq to your wife, but said, when confronted by men's weaknesses to sex, he did not justify his followers to rape any victims, nor to enjoy that which their right hand possesses, but rather stated, and yet both these men are supposedly prophets of the same God. However, their message and their actions differ in many ways, and Allah did not seem to need to send any holy verses to justify any dubious actions of one of them. It is not too late to repent and turn to Jesus Christ. Renounce Islam and don't forget to subscribe to Christian Convert Stories.